Okay, so let's get started because we haven't met in 2 weeks. So let's go over the questions. Everybody should have a Tanach with them because you definitely will need one.
Which sefer?
Maybe
Because I
even a
have
Rambam would be good. By the way, Mazel Tov on your sefer, Jonathan. I just got home, so I didn't have a chance to look at it yet, but it looks really interesting.
It's flying off the shelves, Rabbi Shurin, flying off the shelves.
Well,
you as our publicist.
It's probably flying off the shelf also because scientists know how to make things fly.
Oh, no, but it's really a good book. People love it, and there's even people who wrote that their kids are fighting over who gets to see it first.
Okay, but I want to know: is he going to do Masechta Shabbos and then Erevim and then Psachim?
So I started on Shabbos. I've done the first 6 chapters out of about 30, but I'm too busy dealing with the marketing to continue.
Okay, but eventually.
In Mirz Hashem.
Okay. Now, let's quickly go over the questions. How much does
a full page ad in Hamishpacha cost?
There's more.
Oh, you had a full page ad?
Full page.
Yeah, it was very pretty.
In Ami and also in Torah Tidbits.
Okay. Wow. That's great.
All the
I think I saw the Torah Tidbits this past week. Yeah, I think so. Okay, but I'll get a chance, Bezrat Hashem. I have a couple of things going on, but as soon as they finish, I will do that because it looks really interesting. Okay, but let's take up where we left off. We had approximately 4 questions that Reb Yaakov raised. Again, I don't know what he exactly said to Rav Soloveitchik with regard to the questions, but the 4 questions we saw as follows. It's mashma from the Rambam that there's 2 aspects to Malchus. There's the aspect of Shemamidim HaMelech Moshchem Oto B'Shem Mishcha, right? And then it says Ume'acher Shemoshche HaMelech Harei Zezok Lo Levanav Arolam. And then it doesn't just say when you establish a king, you anoint him with Shemen HaMishcha, and then he's zocha for himself and for his children forever. The Rambam adds ume'acher shemoshchim. So Rabbi Yaakov is medayik that you see that there's 2 aspects here. Your ma'amid a melech, right? Now he's a melech, but then you moshech oto, and now he inherits it to his children as well. Okay, that's his diak from the Rambam. And he says that that's a little bit strange because the Rambam goes on to say that all minuyim, like, a rabbi, president of a shul, whatever it may be, he inherits that to his children. And certainly there was no Mashiach there. So that's Reb Yaakov's first question, is how is it that the Rambam begins by saying after you moshech him, he's zocha, when he goes on to say that all the minuyim are zocha for themselves and their kids, and certainly there was no Mashiach when he become president of the shul, I hope, right? So that's the first question. Second question is that the Rambam, Rabbi Yaakov was medayik from the Rambam. I mean, Rambam says explicitly that Yoshua was a melech, right? Because it says, Amid the melech betchila el al pi beis shel shivim achad zkenim al pi novi ki Yoshua shemino Moshe Rabbeinu beis dino. Okay, so Yoshua seems to have been a king, and yet there was no Mashiach. By Yoshua, we don't find any Mashiach, but he was a king. Now, so Rabbi Yaakov set it up a little bit already because he said that there seems to be 2 aspects: Mamid and Hamelech, and then Moshe Choto, and then Zocha Levana. But Rav Soloveitchik, actually, I mentioned, told Rabbi Yaakov that there's a sifrei, which I think he meant the Mechilta, that says that they did a Mashiach on Yoshua, and Rabbi Yaakov didn't really accept that because first of all, when in Parshas B'Shalach, when they did it, there was no Shemen HaMishcha yet. It could be they used another Shemen, you could say, but Reb Yaakov said it would be strange to be Moshe Yoshua Melech at the beginning of Moshe Rabbeinu's Malchus, right? B'Shalach is when the Jews first get out of Egypt. if you Moshech Yeshua for Melech, it looks pretty strange to Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the king for the next 40 years, right? So it's strange to say that. So Reb Yaakov learned the Mashiach there means it's not literally a Mashiach. It's just a way of saying that they appointed him L'Gdula, right? And we find that in Tanach, right? We find that God tells Eliyahu to be Moshech Elisha. And then he tells him to be Moshech, a non-Jewish king, right? So, and there's obviously no Mashiach. When you appoint a Navi, you're not Moshech him. So it means the word Timshach, that's what it says in Sefer Malachim, means that you should appoint him, okay? But it's a chashuv appointment, so they use the word Mashiach. But in any event, Yoshua doesn't seem to have a Mashiach. Okay, that was the second question. The next question Rabbi Yaakov asks is, if Yoshua was a melech, so what's the big deal that God is telling Shmuel, I want you to tell them the Mishpat HaMelech. In other words, when God tells Shmuel, this is in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, chapter Ches, so Shmuel doesn't really want to make a king. But God says to listen to the Jewish people and make a king, right? Vayom, it's in chapter Ches, pasuk Vav, it says, or Zion, it says, Vayomer Hashem el Shmuel, Shma b'kol ha'am l'chol asher yomru elecha. Listen to the people, what they just said to you, right? Because they didn't embarrass you, they embarrassed me. Okay, which is also important. Ki oti ma'asumim lo chaleim. They have embarrassed me from being king upon them. Okay, but he says, listen to their voice. This is pasuk tes. Ki shma b'kolam. Ach ki ha'ed ta'id b'hem v'garet alem mishpat hamelech asher yimloch aleihem. You should tell them the laws of the king who's going to be, and of course, Vayomer Zeyeh Mishpat HaMelech Hashem Loch Aleim. He's going to take your children, and he's going to have them work for him, and they're going to be his chariot drivers, and he's going to make an army, and he's going to take the crops that you plant. He's going to take a percentage, and he's even going to take your daughters to be cooks, and he goes through a whole. He says your servants he's going to take, right? All this a king has a right to do. That's the Mishpat HaMelech. I mean, I don't want to go into the fact that there is an opinion in the Gemara that says it was just there to scare them. They're not really allowed to do that. The halacha is that the king is allowed to do that. And if the Yoshua was already a king, so the Jews know this parasha. So why is God repeating it? Not just repeating it, he's saying it as if they don't know it. He says like, ach, ki ta'id b'hem v'garet lehem mishpat hamelech asher yimloch alehem. It's as if like it's something new to them. So Reb Yaakov wants to know if Yeshua was a king, why is that a new parsha? The last question is that Rashi in Masechet Sukkah counts Yeshua as a shofet and not as a melech. Okay, now you could say that the Rambam and Rashi disagree, but in any event, it needs clarity because the first shofar we know in Sefer Shoftim is Osniel ben Knas. Okay, Yoshua is not counted as one of the Shoftim there, right? But Rashi says he was a shofet, right? Reb Yaakov doesn't want to assume that the Rambam disagrees with Rashi. He doesn't want to assume that. And therefore he says, was Yoshua a melech or was he a shofet? And of course, what are the dinim of a shofet? Right? What we have to know, like, what is the shofet status exactly? Okay? So that's what Reb Yaakov says. Now, Reb Yaakov is about this answer I'm positive he gave to Rav Soloveitchik. If we go back to page Kuf Pei Zayin, which I resent you today, and at the end of Kuf Pei Zayin, which I underlined V'hinei, okay? Reb Yaakov was about to do something which Rav Soloveitchik after this said, I know one thing, Reb Yaakov knows Tanach. That I know. Why? Because Reb Yaakov is going to build a whole sheet and halacha from psukim in Tanach. Okay. Now I know that generally, in Michala they always quote Rev Koopman always quoted the Or Sameach, the Meshech Chochma, that he tends to do this. He can show a source and then build a whole halacha from that source. Okay, I don't remember examples. I mean, I don't have my Meshech Chochma, which Wayne gave me for a present, if I remember correctly. But one of my kids who went to Michala borrowed it, never gave it back to me. So I was thinking of looking it up today, and I remembered that I don't have it anymore. Okay, I'll probably have to get a new set because I don't know if they'll ever give it back to me. But the Meshech Chochma is known to look at psukim and start building on them. That's exactly what Reb Yaakov does here. He builds a whole lumdus on psukim. So let's take a look at the psukim. There are two psukim that sound similar. Vehem ya'iru, page kuf peches, lanu lafine astaiti ha'inyan. They will enlighten us with the matter of all my questions. Vehem b'shoftim, chapter ches, chav beis chav gimel, vayomru b'nei Yisrael el Gido, Mishol banu, gamata, gam bincha, gam ben bincha. Vayomer aleim Gido lo emshol ani bachem, lo yimshol b'ni bachem. Hashem yimshol bachem. Okay, after Gidon is victorious in the war, right? They look at Gidon and they say, you know what? We love you. You were so great, such a hero. We want you to rule us. We want your children to rule us and your grandchildren to rule us. Okay, that's what they say to him. Now, normally you would just say they're very excited about him being their leader, so they give him this covet, so to speak. Of course, Reb Yaakov doesn't learn that way. V'chein matzinu b'Shmuel Aleph, chapter Yud Beis, Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. Vayishlach Hashem es Yerubal. Shmuel's talking to the Jewish people after he made a king for them. And God sent Yerubal, who's Gidon, Ves Bedan, Ves Yiftach, Ves Shmuel. Shmuel says God sent Shmuel, which is quite interesting, right? As if Shmuel is like not connected to himself, which is an interesting thing. Vayetzer leschem, vatiru ki nochash melech b'nei Amon ba'alechem, vatomru li lo ki melech yimloch aleinu, v'Hashem elokeichem alkechem. God, your God, is your melech. Okay, just as Gidon said, Hashem yimshol bachem, so does Shmuel say, right? Hashem elokeichem alkechem. V'ayin sham v'hinei matzinu beis psukim k'she'amru l'Gidon yimshol b'hem, sheyimshol b'hem heisha Hashem yimshol b'chem. V'chein Shmuel k'sheheshav lehem k'shesholu melech amalem Hashem elokeichem alkechem. V'hainu k'she'amru l'Gidon mishol banu gam bincha gam ben bincha. Hainu sheyasa melech aleim b'pnei shashofet einenu morish minuyo livanav v'zeh rak melech morish. A shofet never inherits the malchus to his children. We don't find it ever happened, right? And he doesn't have a Mashiach. The Rambam said you need to have a Mashiach for that to happen, which Rabbi Yaakov will talk more about soon, right? But he says this must be, what are they saying to him? We want you to be our king. In other words, till now you were a shofet. God sent you to save us. Now we want bincha ben bincha, which means inherit the malchus, which means we want to be moshech you for a king. Heishavu lo emshol ani bachem, Hashem yimshol bachem. I'm not going to be your king. God is your king. Hatshuva hazos mochicha shashofet enenu hamoshel. Okay, the shofet elish hamemshalah he shal hakadosh baruch hu. The shofet is not the moshel, as Shmuel and Gidon said. Hashem yimshol bachem, or Hashem elokeichem malkechem. Shamem shalo shal hakadosh baruch hu. That's what they were saying. God is your king. What do you need me? You have God. Vashofet hi nahu Shlucho shel makom. All he is a messenger of God on this earth. V'chein Shmuel amar, Hashem Elokeichem malchem, v'ani hineni rak shlucho shel makom. Kamo shekosav le'el v'yishlach Hashem v'et Shmuel. Like God sent, right? It says God sent Shmuel and others to be the leaders of the Jewish people. Okay? Now, usually with Malchus, God doesn't send. The Jewish people ask, and then God decides, right? Here, with the shofet, God sends the Jewish people the leader, and Reb Yaakov says that leader doesn't have his own malchus. He doesn't become a melech, right? He doesn't own the malchus, right? He's God's shliach, meaning, Reb Yaakov, I remember him saying it, he was a shliach lamid malchus haTorah. I remember him saying the malchus of the Torah, right? That's what he's there for. Okay? Nimtza lefizeh shemini hashofar himinu shluchu shel malchus shamayim v'nimtza sheyesh lo b'chol mitzvos Hashem kol dinei melech sharei hu ino shluchu shel malchus shamayim. With regard to all the mitzvos, meaning if God commanded us something, he has the din of melech with regard to that. In other words, I'm God's messenger. Let's say if God had a mitzvah to fight a war, we have to fight a war. If someone says, I'm not showing up, the shofet can kill him. He's a morid b'malchus. He's not a morid b'melech. If he's a morid b'melech, he's a morid b'melech Hashem. Or he's a morid b'malchus haTorah, right? But he's not a morid b'melech hashofet. The shofet's not a melech. He's just seeing through God's malchus. He's making sure that it's working, that God's malchus is working. So if the guy doesn't show up and God said there's a king, there's a war you have to fight, the king can kill you. Elisha malchus, right? Eina shelo ad sheyorishenu levon of Akrav. It's not his. Since he's a shliach shel makom, he can't inherit it to his kids because it's not his malchus. Okay, so he can't inherit to the kids. It's God's malchus. God doesn't have any children according to our religion, right? So it can't inherit to anybody, right? But srara, it sounds like from Reb Yaakov, this is a tremendous chiddush, that he doesn't even have a srara. He's like a shliach shalachem. He doesn't have his own malchus. He's just representing God. Because
So how can you put somebody to death?
What?
How can you put somebody to death?
Because he has the din of malchus. He has all the dinei malchus, right? That any king has, except with regard to something personal of his, right? Rabbi Yaakov is going to say, for instance, if someone goes over to the king and spits in his face, the king is allowed to kill him. Or if someone curses the king, like Shimi ben Gera cursed David HaMelech, right? The king's allowed to kill him, right? Yoshua wouldn't be allowed to kill him. A shofar wouldn't be allowed to kill him because that has to do with my personal malchus. You didn't rebel against God. You rebel against the king when you spit in his face, right? That's what you do. He's not allowed to, he doesn't have any personal status, right? Not even the status of swara he doesn't even have. He doesn't even have the president of the shul because he's just there to make sure that God's malchus goes into action. That's all he's there for. So there's a din melech and there's a din malchus, right? That's what Reb Yaakov was saying to Rav Soloveitchik. I'm sure he said that because the Soloveitchiks love two dinim and melech. They love that stuff. Okay? If someone who rebels against him, if he rebels against a mitzvah that the shofet gave him, that was a mitzvah Hashem, if he gives him a personal tzivui, like go to the makolet for me, and he decides he's not doing it for the king, it's a bizayin of a Talmud Chacham. So whatever Shulchan Aruch says about bizayin Talmud Chacham, you could put him in Chayrim, but he's not Chayev Misa with that. Okay, now Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky in number 10 says the following thing: Balpel Rabbeinu, and I remember this. Shezeh meduyak b'loshen morid b'malchus, right? The Yoel of Admor Sanhedrin. When the Gemara learns that someone's more b'malchus is chayiv misa because of the pasuk in Sefer Yoshua, Kol isha sheyamres picha, you must, right? The Gemara says morid b'malchus and not morid b'melech. So Rabbi Yaakov is medayik. It's Yamor b'malchus, in the din malchus, but not in the din of melech. May Yoshua shenemel of koisha sheyamres picha, you must. Shebe'emes lo hayelo din melech, rak shehayelo malchus. He had a malchus, but not a melech. V'amorid be'in a malchus hazeh hu hachayav misa. The morid in this malchus, that is the mechayev of misa. Okay, and this is the reason why Gidon killed the people of Peniel. He went and he killed a number of people because they didn't come to help him, because that was a Tzivi Hashem that everyone has to fight. And I remember Reb Yaakov saying this to me in Yiddish. I'm going to spit at you, right? Lo yiyem chayev misa. He won't be chayev misa. He might be chayev a chayrim because Yeshua was a Talmud Chacham, or Osnil ben Knas was a Talmud Chacham, but he's not chayev misa. Leumas hamorid b'melech yalfinu midavid shaharag l'shimi. This I don't know what Rabbi Yosef means over here. David HaMelech did not kill Shimi, but he certainly could have killed him because Shimi, right? Shlomo killed him, correct? Shlomo HaMelech kills Shimi ben Gera, right? But David tells Shimi, right? And that's in Sefer Malachim, beginning of Sefer Malachim. It says, David says to Shlomo, after Shlomo becomes king, so he says to Shlomo like this, here, V'hinei imcha Shimi ben Gera. Shimi ben Gera is with you. This is Sefer Malachim Aleph, chapter Beis, pasuk Ches. V'hinei imcha Shimi ben Gera ben hayamini v'bachurim v'hu kilalani klola nimretzis v'yom lechti machanayim. He cursed me, a very, very strong curse. V'eshava lo b'Hashem lemar ima mischa b'cherev. And I promised him that I wouldn't kill him with a sword. Okay? Meaning, right, that he was Chayiv Misa. David promised he wouldn't kill him with a sword. So he was Chayiv Misa. So I think that's all Reb Yosef means, because the Misa, he didn't kill Shimi. Shlomo killed him actually for something else, but he told Shlomo, find something, because he's Chayiv Misa, but I promised not to kill him. Which is, by the way, interesting. There's a halacha here, and the Rambam brings it, halacha. The Rambam brings in, when he brings the halacha of Morid b'Malchus, he says like this, Kol HaMorid, this is chapter Gimel Pasuk Ches in the Rambam, halacha Ches, Kol HaMorid b'Melech Yisrael, Yesh l'Melech Rishus l'Harga. If someone rebels against the king has permission to kill him. Afilu gozer al echad meishara am sheilchem makom ploni v'lo halach o shelo yetze mibeso v'yatza chayiv misa. Even if he just commands someone to go somewhere, the guy doesn't go. This is talking about a melech, right? He's chayiv misa. V'imratza lahargo yehori. Listen to the way the Rambam says. He's chayiv misa, but if the melech wants to kill him, he can kill him. So you see, he's not obligated to kill him. He's chayiv another misi b'dei shamayim, and the melech could kill him. But David promised him that he wouldn't kill him. But David let Shlomo know, I promised not to kill him, but I need you to take care of him. Okay? That's what he does. Kshenemar kol isha sheyamres picha. That's the pasuk of Yeshua. The Rambam brings it. And by the way, I mentioned to you, we'll talk about this. Where does the Torah say this? Of course, the Rambam brings the pasuk of Yeshua because that's what the Gemara brings. But where does the Gemara get this halacha from? Or where does Sefer Yoshua get the halacha. V'chein kol mavazes hamelech or mecharfo yesh melech reshus lahargoi. Again, someone who belittles the king, right? Kishimi ben Gera. The Rambam brings Shimi ben Gera. The melech has a right to kill him. The ein lemelech reshus laharog ela b'sayif bilvad. And the king only could kill him with a sword. Where did the Rambam learn that from? Because David says to Shlomo, I promise not to kill him with a sword. So Reb Kivega wrote on the side of his Rambam, right? This is the makar for the Rambam, that he can only kill him with a sword, because he said, I promise not to kill him with a sword. Okay, but that's a side issue. Okay, so that's what Reb Yaakov is saying over here, is that if the person, Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky in 10, it was not a pgia in Malchus, a pgia in David. You must meduyak shamarida haisa b'yachas litzivuya. To listen what Rabbi Yaakov is saying over here about Peh. The Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven, Chatzi Shei Menashe say to him, Kol isha sheyamres picha, right? They don't say if they belittle you. If they yamres picha, what you tell them, right? So Rabbi Yaakov says, shamarida haisa b'yachas litzivuya, if the king commands you with his mouth, right? Then you're chayav misa. But if you walk over to the king and you punch him in the nose, you're not chayav misa. Shenosan hashofet ban hagas ha'am, right? The shofet gave a tzivui in leading the nation. V'lo mashur negelo bofen ishi, right? It's not something that was negeya to him, but ofen ishi. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Yaakov basically is saying over here. Lefika hu marushir. 1 second. Oh, masha'en kein achara mashicha. After the Mashiach, right? What does Rabbi Yaakov say? After Achar Mashiach, Nase Gufo Mekudash. His body becomes holy. Okay? In other words, he becomes a Chefzer Shel Kedusha, the Melech. Right? Yoshua is not a Chefzer Shel Kedusha. He has a Malchus Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu, but he doesn't have a Chefzer Shel Kedusha. When you anoint him, what happens when you anoint a Kli in the Mishkan? If you now take the Kli, you're Mol Behegdish. Before, you're just a Ganef, and now you're Mol Behegdish. If you anoint the king, Rabbi Yaakov says, he becomes Hegdish, right? He becomes a Kli Shel Kedusha, right? And by the way, I remember Reb Yaakov saying to me, you remember that when Shmuel was Moshe Shol, what does he do right after the Mashiach? He kisses him, right? Because he's a Chefzer Shel Kedusha. What do you do to Chefzer? Our minhag is, you take a siddur, you close it, you kiss the siddur, you kiss the Sefer Torah, right? You kiss Shol because now he's a Chefzer Shel Kedusha. He wanted Shol to know, now you're a Chefzer Shel Kedusha. I anointed you. Okay? So that's what he says. By the way, this I never spoke to Reb Yaakov about, but I always wanted to, but I never did. I have a pretty good riot to Reb Yaakov from a pasuk when in Sefer Malachim, David says Shimi ben Gera was Mekalel me, okay, Klol and Imretzes, right? But where the story happens in Shmuel Bet. At the end of Shmuel Bet, so it's Shmuel Bet, Chaf Bet. So over there's a very interesting lashon that I don't know why Reb Yaakov didn't say it, but I remember thinking to myself, this would be a good proof to Reb Yaakov. So it says over there, here, chapter Bet, Shmuel Bet, Yutet, Pasuk Chaf Bet. When Shimi curses David, Avishai ben Suri is with him, and he says like this: Vayan Avishai ben Suri vayomer hatachas zos lo yuma Shimi. For this cursing you, he won't die. Ki kilel Mashiach Hashem. Very interesting. Ki kilel Mashiach Hashem. That, here you see Rabbi Yaakov's idea, right? He's a Mashiach Hashem, so now you get a klol. Now, I don't know, Rabbi Yaakov never brought this raya, and I remember always thinking, I got to tell it to Reb Yaakov. By the time I wanted to tell it to him, he was gone, right? But I think it's a very good right. He kilel Mashiach Hashem, right? He doesn't see kilel Amelech, Mashiach Hashem. That's the problem, okay? That's what Rabbi Yosef writes in the footnote. Let's go on. Here. Page Kuf pay test now. Ulefi zeh. Okay. Ulefi zeh. Ein bein minui hashofet u bein minui hamelech v'lo klum. There's no, right, difference between the shofet and the mini hamelech, the mini hashofet, mini hashofet, nothing except Elish hamelech moshchim v'oz nasa malchus kinyono u'rechusho aprati. Okay, only that once you give a mashiach to the king, right, his malchus becomes his own. Kinyono, he owns it. Rechusho aprati. Avol kol dinei malchus sham b'shofet kamo b'melech imhu mitzivuye Hashem. Okay, now that's why what Reb Yaakov is fetching over here is the Rambam calls him Melech. That Yeshua is a Melech. Wait, Yeshua is a shofet, right? Now Reb Yaakov proved that a shofet is there to establish God's place in the world, God's Torah in the world, God's place in the world. We'll talk more about this, but that's what he's there. So why are you calling Yeshua Melech? He says because he has all the Dinei Malchus except Yerusha, and of course he doesn't have. If you insult him personally, right? In other words, the Rambam says, for instance, right, when the Rambam talks about this, he says, "Kvod Gadol noagim b'melech." Okay, ein rochem al suso, ve'yoshem al kis'o, ve'mishtamshim b'shar vito, v'lo b'kisro, right? V'lo be'echad mikol kli tashmishav. And when he dies, the Rambam says, you burn them, right? That's only, Rabbi Yaakov would say, that's only for a melech, because that's those things become his, right? But if somebody sits on Yeshua's horse, he's not a Moed B'melech, because Yeshua doesn't have a personal kingship, right? And therefore, you could sit on Yeshua's horse, and you could use his Sharvit Hazahav, whatever it may be, right? Because he doesn't have that. See, what basically Reb Yaakov is saying is Yeshua had a din melech, right? But not with regard to something as a personal hefza shel kedusha, or as inheriting to his children. Because once he becomes a hefza shel kedusha, that's why he inherits it to his kids. Because now he is holy, he's able to inherit to his kids. Because now it becomes, in other words, the person becomes something special, and then so the kids have it also. Because he had it, so the kids have it also. That becomes his rechush, right? So that's what he could do. But otherwise, with regard to Moed B'malchus, right? If he gives a command, right? Like for instance, he killed Achan, right? Killed Achan, right? Why did he kill Achan? Because he told people you're not allowed to take from the Cherem, and Achan took from the Cherem, right? So that is a tzivui shel the Melech in terms of the Melech gave a command. Why? Because God should take the Cherem, not us. We shouldn't have the Cherem. God should have the Cherem. You went against my command as establishing the Torah, right? I could kill you. So it's midin Malchus, not midin Melech. Kill midin Malchus. By the way, the Rambam says this in Hilchos Sanhedrin. The Rambam says that Yeshua killed Achan either mipnei harasha or midin Malchus. That's the lashon, midin Malchus, right? Again, Malchus he has. He doesn't have personal melech, right? The question is, like for instance, so therefore, obviously, what Reb Yaakov is saying over here is that therefore the Parsha of Melech, the Mishpat HaMelech in Sefer Shmuel was never read to the Jewish people because that has to do with the personal king, right? So Yoshua didn't have that. It was introduced to the Jewish people when they asked for a king. I'm not going into now. We mentioned that Parsha must have been an oral Parsha somewhere, and because it's not in the Torah, right? So where did Shmuel get it from? It must have been something oral that was from Sinai. When you make a melech, this is the Parsha, the Mishpat HaMelech. And by the way, could be the Parsha of Melech we have in Parsha Shoftim is also the Melech and not the Shofet, right? No, it's that Parsha that he has to write two Sifrei Torah, right? And he has to write, and he has to not have too much gold or too much horses or whatever it may be, right? That might also be shaykh only to a king and not to Yoshua. That's the Parsha of Melech, and that Yoshua didn't have a shaykhus to, right? Reb Yaakov has a little bit of discussion about this, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. He has a discussion about this as well. Okay, but that's basically what Reb Yaakov says, and now he says page Kuf Pei Tes. Okay, Kuf Pei Tes.
Would Moshe Rabbeinu also have a din of shofet?
I think Reb Yaakov held yes. He didn't have a din of a melech that you could like belittle him and be chayiv misa.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay.
I think that's where Reb Yaakov held. I think Moshe Rabbeinu also had that because we don't find the Mashiach by Moshe either, right? Avol called it Malchus Shavim. This is 3 lines from the top. Kuf Pei Tes on the right, right? Ulefikach Shapi Alfin Miminuyo Shel Yoshua bePerak Aleph Mimelach Malach Gimel V'Gam Kol Isha Sheyamres Picha, right? Perak Gimel, Ayin Sham. Therefore, in other words, we do learn out from the minuya of Yoshua. We can, in other words, the Rambam can bring that Yoshua had a din melech, and it's not a stira to the Rashi in Sukkah, because Rashi in Sukkah says he was shofet, as shofet has the dinei malchus, so it's not a contradiction, right? But God mikol shisha yamres picha, right? That you have the king. The king has a right to, the king or the shofet has a right to kill you if you go against his word. And again, the word means a word if he got from God, a nevuah, and you didn't listen to it, right? Or it's a mitzvah to like do mechiyas amole, right? There's a mitzvah. So Yeshua tells everybody to come, and one person doesn't come. So of course he'll be chayiv misa because he's more b'malchus. Here Reb Yaakov is a little bit nogeya b'davar. Okay, the Rambam says in chapter Gimel, at the end of chapter Gimel, he says, "V'yesh lo le'asor ulahakos b'shotim l'chvodo." Okay, there is for him to imprison and smite a person with the whips for his honor. Okay, where does the Rambam get that from? Yeshlo asor lahakos b'shotim kanireh shalom ad migidon. D'chsiv vayikach es ziknei ha'ir ves kotzei hamidbar vayoda bahem et anshe sukkos. Maybe vayivoda bahem as anshe sukkos. Okay, so it says he says the Ram. You see that Gidon was a shofet, and he was able to implement this idea that the Rambam brings, right? Harei shalom adinei melech midinei shoftim. The Rambam learned the din of a melech from the din of the shofet. This is going on Gidon. Right? Mishum sheyesh lam kol dinei melech imunagel dinei Torah ol milchama bad klal Yisrael. V'hainu shehi malchus shamayim v'ashofet who he knew shliach, and the shofet is the shliach. And Rabbi Yosef in number 15 says Umeturitz lefize madua hutstrich Shmuel anovi lo deal amet parshas hamelach. Mishum dekodem l'chein lo hay Moshe v'Yoshua begedem malachim. Here he says, you see, lo hay Moshe v'Yoshua begedem malachim ela kein shoftim. Okay, meaning that Moshe, they didn't know this parsha melech for Moshe either because he had a din of a shofet, but a shofet has a din of malchus, right? This is the piece of Torah he told over to Rav Soloveitchik. We're going to go on to see that Reb Yaakov adds a ton to this, right? The only thing I'm going to say is that the Or Sameach disagrees with Reb Yaakov about the source of this Rambam, that the Rambam says, V'yeshol le'asoro lahakos b'shotim lichvodo. The Or Sameach says the source of that is from Rechavam HaMelech, because Rechavam uses that pasuk in Avi Yisar etchem b'shotim. Our father, Yisar is lashon of punished you or pained you, right? B'shotim. So, in other words, the source is not a shofet. The shofet did it, right? It's the source is actually a melech who's talking, who did it. Rechavim says, my father, right, meaning Shlomo HaMelech was Rechavim's father, Yisar eschem b'shotim, right? Ulefize lohevia Rambam raya me shofet. The Rambam didn't bring a raya from a shofet at all, right? Reb Yaakov had a little bit nogeya b'dover. He wanted the Rambam to bring rayas from a shofet to Malchus. But the Or Sameach says that piece of Rambam is from Sefer Malachim. Okay? By the way, all these Rambams here, even when the Rambam doesn't quote a name of anybody, right? In other words, before he says Shimi ben Geir, Shimi ben Geir. But all these things are taken from Tanach. You see that the Rambam says he only has a right to kill you with a sword. That's what Reb Kiva says from Sefer Malachim. It's not even Gemaras. The Rambam is taking it from Tanach, which the important thing about that is that you see that the Rambam learned halachas from the Tanach. Now, of course, you could ask, is okay, so where did the Tanakh get it from? You can't learn halachas from Tanakh, from Nevi'im. You have to learn from the Torah. That's a good question. But you see that the Rambam saw things in the Tanakh and he learned them halacha. So that's basically what Reb Yaakov did with this whole Dvar Torah that he told Rav Soloveitchik. He said, I have two psukim that define what is a shofet. Because both Shmuel, who was a shofet, and Gidon, who was a shofet, told the Jewish people, Hashem yimshol b'chem, Hashem lokechem al kechem. Very clear, two the same ideas, almost the same. He says, b'signon echad, not exactly the same lush, b'signon echad. That is the yesod of Reb Yaakov's idea that there's two dinim in Malchus. There's a Malchus shel Melech and there's a Malchus shel Shofet, right? And he gives the nafkaminas what they are. That's basically what Reb Yaakov is doing here, deducing it from the Tanakh, not doing it from anything else from the Tanakh. His whole yesod, his whole halachic yesod or lumdish yesod, he deduced from Tanakh. Okay, that's what I think. The person who told me that, he asked for Soloveitchik about Reb Yaakov. He says, I know that he knows Tanakh. That because he deduced all this from Tanakh. That's what I think he meant over there. Yes,
sure.
Yes, question.
I just wanted to pick up on the last point that you made. In defense of your grandfather and in defense of the Rambam, even though we don't learn halachas from Tanakh, in the strict sense of in other words, we don't darshan psukim in the Tanakh. However, we do look at psukim in the Tanakh for a gilui milsa.
Correct.
And what's going on here, what the theory that Rabbi Yaakov is presenting is that there is a certain Torah Sheba'al Peh definition of the ma'amad of a shofet as opposed to the ma'amad of a navi, as opposed to the ma'amad of a melech.
Right.
And for all of those things, the Tanakh, that's exactly what's happening here. We're seeing a gilui milsa, that there's certain status that these tafkidim have, and the psukim reflect the halachic ramifications, and that's not darshaning psukim. It's not it's not a medrash halach on a pasuk.
No, you're right, 100%. I agree with you. But with regard to that particular thing that you just said, I think that's exactly what Reb Yaakov meant, and I think it's completely legal, right? But the minute the Rambam himself, right, he learns from, let's say, Sefer Yoshua, Amor b'malchus is chayev misa, right? He has a right to do that because the Gemara did it. Or he learns from Rechavam, halacha that the king is allowed to actually torture you if you rebel against him, right? He learns that from Rechavam. And it was a Rambam has a right to do that, but the minute the Rambam does it, one has a right to ask, okay, but where did the pasuk get it from? I'm not delegitimizing it. I'm just saying that, and Reb Yaakov and the Meshech Chochmah used to do this a lot. They'd say, okay, now I'm going to show you where the Rebbe is in the Torah to this Morid B'Malchus. And in the next class, Reb Yaakov is going to actually do that. He's going to actually show you where Morid B'Malchus comes from in the Torah, because it's in Sefer Yoshua, and there has to be a source in the Torah. And I don't know if you remember, but I mentioned he asked for Shnei Kotler, Zichrono Livracha, this question. And Shnei Kotler, of course, answered the easiest answer. It's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That Melech. That's where Yoshua got it from. But Reb Yaakov didn't accept it. He said, that's no trick. And he said, das ist nicht kein Kunst. That's no trick, right? You can say that on everything, right? So Reb Yaakov decides he's going to find in the Torah, okay? And he uses the Ibn Ezra. I gave you 2 pages of Ibn Ezra. We're going to need them both next time, right? Where Reb Yaakov finds that the Ibn Ezra is learning a pshat, that you'll have now a source in the Torah that a melech is allowed to kill somebody for certain particular things. Okay, so that's really what this is, the Yesod. And next week we'll talk more about Reb Yaakov is going to now use this Yesod to learn up the end of Sefer Shoftim. Okay, we'll see that next week. The end of Sefer Shoftim is very problematic, and Reb Yaakov is going to point out the problems. There's 2 famous stories there, Pelegish Begiva and Pesel Micha, actually Pesel Micha and Pelegish Begiva. And with Reb Yaakov's Yesod, he's going to learn it up very, very well. Okay, we'll hold off on that. Any other questions?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. It said these are the kings of Esau before there was a king in Israel, right? And Rashi points that out, that we're talking about from Shaul HaMelech on onwards.
Right.
That goes to show that Yeshua and Moshe Rabbeinu were not kings. Is that true?
So again, Rabbi Yaakov, I think what Rabbi Yaakov would say to you is, to the contrary, that's exactly what it means. They were Shlichei Hashem, so they don't have their own status, right? They don't have their own status. So they have Dinei Melech, but they're not Melech. They're not Melachim. They don't even have a Srara, which is a Chiddush Nora, right? In other words, Srara also inherits to the children. They don't even have that. They're Shluchei Hashem, because Hashem Yimshol B'chem, Hashem L'keichem Malkechem. So therefore, I don't even know how to say it. I'm just mimicking God. That's all I'm doing. You can't call that a melech if I'm mimicking God. You know, that's not a malchus. Shol is the first melech.
Why didn't he bring that makor? It's like from the Torah.
The what?
Why didn't he bring that makor? Like it's from the Torah.
You mean that Shol was the first king?
Yeah.
I mean, that's according to Rashi.
Correct. Yes.
Without Rashi, you might be able to learn other pshatim, right? But you're right. According to Rashi, you see that well, because Rabbi Yaakov understands that nobody really called Yoshua a melech until the Rambam came along. That's the truth. You know, again, I shouldn't say that, because in the Gemara it's mashma that Yoshua had a king. It was a king. It's mashma very clearly Yoshua was king. Rabbi Yaakov brought some proofs to that, but explicit, the Rambam is the one who says it. It's not explicit in the Gemara that Yoshua was king, even though you can infer it very easily, or that Moshe was a melech. It's not explicit, even though next week we'll talk about Vayehi B'Yeshurin melech b'Sasev Rosh Hashanah. Who is that referring to? Okay, and that we'll see. The Rashi, the Ibn Ezra talks about whether that's referring to Moshe, but it doesn't say Vayehi Moshe melech, Vayehi B'Yeshurin melech. There was a king in Yeshurun, right? So we'll have to see that next week to see a little bit more about that. But I think Rabbi Yaakov would say is that the first real king was Shaul. He got the Mashiach. He got the kiss from Shmuel. He was the first real king, right? That's when kingship really started. Till then, there were shoftim. The Jews didn't have to ask for a shofet. God sent the shofet. When the Jews asked for a king, then God said, "Som tasim alecha melech," right? That's what it says in the Parsha Shoftim. When they asked for Marta, right? Or Marta, what does it say? Marta lecha or Marta lechem? So, simu alai melech, som tasim alecha melech mikerav achecha sheyivchar Hashem. Right? In other words, when the Jewish people will say, right, give us a king, you should give them a king. That's what God told Shmuel. Stop arguing with the Jewish people, right? And telling them I'm the king, right? And that's why God says, they weren't Mavayish you, they were Mavayish me, Mavazim me. Because I'm the king, right? You were just a shliach, but I'm actually the king. By asking you to make a king, they're getting rid of me. That's good, very good according to Reb Yaakov, because that's exactly what Reb Yaakov says, is that they said, Hashem Elkeichem, Hashem Elkeichem, Malkechem, Shmuel said, right? Or Hashem Yimshol Bachem, right? It's very clear that they're saying that God is your king, right? And you shouldn't need anything else. You don't need me. By the way, after, just to bring it out, after Gidon says that to them, you know what? It says something very interesting. It says something very strange in the Tanach. We have another minute or two. Okay, 1 second. In the Tanakh, it says like this. After they say to Gidon, Mishol Banu Gam Ata, Gam Bincha, Gam Ben Bincha, right? And he says, Lo Emshol Ani Bachem, Lo Yimshol Bani Bachem, Hashem Yimshol Bachem, right? So Gidon asks them to make a matzeva about this heroism of Gidon, which wasn't a good idea, but he told them to make a matzeva as a memory for him. And then it says like this: Vayelech Yerubal ben Yosh Vayosh. 1 second. Vayishev bebeso, and Yerubal ben Yoash went and he sat in his house. I mean, when do you find that they tell you about a guy going home and sitting in his house, right? You know, it's a very strange thing that the Navi has a whole pasuk, Vayelech Yerubal ben Yoash Vayeshev bebeso, and he sat in his house. Where else did he go? I mean, what, he didn't have a home? Like, he sat in his house, right? The Tanakh is clearly saying he's not an official person. He was a private personality. He went home just like everybody else in college, so he sat in his house. That's the way he lived the rest of his life. Private citizen. Because when do you become a shofet? When God sends you out to be a shofet. You finish being a shofet, you're not a shofet anymore. That's it. Right? So that's really, whereas a king, you never say that about a king. That a king finishes, he goes, sits in his house, right? The king is a king. He's a king forever, right? So it is certain. Reb Yaakov doesn't say this, but it's certain. It's a little bit like becoming a private citizen again. I don't want it to sound too strong, because I think if you would ask Reb Yaakov, after he's sitting in the house, right? Do you have to listen to him? I think Reb Yaakov would say, if he gives you a command of God, then he's a shofet again. Right? He's coming out, he's coming out, he's into his Superman uniform. He's coming, right? And he's a shofet again. But if he would say something to you privately, do something for me, you wouldn't have to do it for him. You don't have to do it. He's a private citizen, just like I'm a private citizen. He's no more than me, right? He's only a king when he's doing the Shlichus Hashem. If there's no Shlichus Hashem, he's not a king. That's it. Whereas a king... What?
It's Maduyak by Moshe Rabbeinu. It's Lo Chamor Echad Lakachti. He didn't, because that's the opposite of the Din Melech.
Oh, excellent point. Good, excellent point. Because the Melech takes your Chamor and Shor, right? He has a right. That's the Mishpat HaMelech, right? And he says, I didn't do that. I never did. That's a good point. But there's also another thing that it says. over here, when it gives you the king, right? It says like this. V'amarta simalai melech b'chol hagoyim somta simalecha melech asher yivchar Hashem elkecha b'kerev achecha to simal melech, right? 1 second. 1 second. Oh, he doesn't use the Lashon. I thought he used the Lashon. Hold on 1 second. I think the Rambam uses the Lashon. I thought the Pasuk used the Lashon. But the Rambam uses the Lashon like this. At the time when the Melech is Yoshev al Kisei Malchuso, the Melech is never sitting in his home, so to speak. Yoshev al Melech al Kisei Malchuso, Kosef lo Sefer Torah la'atzmo, Yoser al Sefer shehinichu lo avosav. Right? When he's sitting on his kingdom, that's when he has the obligation. When he's sitting on his Kisei Malchuso, that's when, not a minute before. Right? The Melech is defined by Kisei Malchus. Right? The Shofet is not defined by that. He's a private citizen. He's a private citizen. Okay, but it's a very nice proof that you have, Daniel, about Moshe. I didn't take that. By the way, Shmuel also says it. At Shormi Lokachti, right? He says the same thing because I guess they're Shoftim. They're not Malach.
Those are the bookends of your period from Moshe to Shmuel.
The what? The what?
The bookends of the period we're talking about from Moshe to Shmuel.
Exactly. Okay, excellent. Okay, we'll stop here, guys. We'll take it up next week.